In this video, we're making pillowy soft, shockingly simple, totally delicious, extremely dippable breadsticks. Ever since I started making these breadsticks, they have been on constant rotation at our house. I've talked them up to everybody because they're really easy to make. They were successful on the first try, which is not true with every recipe. They're great for having alongside soups or salads. You could feed a crowd with them, and they're very beginner friendly. I was bragging on these breadsticks to my nieces and nephew, talking about how yummy they were, and they said that they wanted to learn how to make it. So we spent the morning a few weeks ago working on this recipe and trying a few experiments as well. We added warm water, instant yeast, and a little bit of sugar to the bowl of a stand mixer. And if you're worried that you don't have a stand mixer and you can't make them, you can. We have a version later on where we do it by hand. After the yeast, water, and sugar sits for a few minutes and is woken up, we put in the flour and the salt and then give it a quick little mix with the dough hook before we put it in the stand mixer. For this recipe, the first time I tried it, the recipe was done in cups and teaspoons, and later on I converted it to grams because I thought that it would be easier for the kids to do it with the grams on the food scale. We put this in the food mixer on low to medium low speed and let it mix for probably about 5 minutes until it was elastic, nice and smooth. This type of dough is a very easy dough to work with. It's not sticky like many other doughs. You could grab it with your hands. You just need to lightly flour the surface you're working on. After I turn the dough out and lightly dust it with flour, I begin rolling it out. And my goal is somewhere between 3/4 of an inch and a 1/2 inch thickness. This dough is very forgiving, so don't have to worry too much about the thickness. That's just generally what I'm shooting for. After the dough has been rolled out, I use a pizza cutter to cut ribbons of the dough that are about an inch thick, and I try my best to keep them even in size. After I go the long way, then I go back in and cut the dough again to make them probably about 5 inches long. This is a type of dough where you can make all different shapes. So this is just a shape that we landed on and that we thought would be good. Kids are going to be eating this, so I don't want to make the breadsticks too long. So this is a shape that I thought would work really well. And after you roll them out, you could take them and give them a little twist. It makes a nice shape. And then you fill up your pan. This recipe makes an entire sheet pan of these breadsticks. So you might need to push them together a little bit more than you think you do originally to make room for the other breadsticks. And that's fine. It's not going to affect them too much as long as you're not mashing them together. You can see here we're filling up the pan, removing some around and tucking new ones in where the spaces allow. And after this has all been assembled, you're going to brush these breadsticks with a stick of melted butter and 3 cloves of minced garlic plus a teaspoon of garlic powder. And after you've covered every square inch of them, you're going to bake them in the oven at 350 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes, depending on your oven. Okay, so experiment number 1. We wanted to see if we could make the same recipe without using the mixer. I had up until this point only used the mixer, and we tried it with just using a regular bowl and kneading it on the counter. So this day we made 2 batches of the breadsticks. The first batch of the breadsticks was just the way that I had made it previously. I knew that it would work out and it was successful, and especially since I had told my nieces and nephew about this, I wanted to make sure we had one version that I knew was a success. The second version was the experiment version, and I told them my philosophy of experimenting with food. In the past, I would experiment with food that I was meant to be serving that night, and many times that would stress me out. Sometimes that recipe would turn out great. Some recipes are just on the nose the first time, and some recipes you have to work at them. The first time might not be the best. And so I learned over the years that what I needed to do was only experiment when I also had something that I knew would be successful alongside that experiment. Adhering to this philosophy has really helped take a lot of the stress out of cooking. Since in this version we weren't using the mixer, we kneaded the dough on the counter by hand. We set a timer for 10 minutes and we were just stretching it and folding the dough. You could see it started from a shaggy dough and it's becoming a more smooth and elastic dough. After the timer was up and the dough felt smooth and elastic, we rolled out the dough and then we tried to think, what type of shape could we make this dough into? Since we already had the breadstick form, we brainstormed about what are some additional shapes that we could make using this dough. This brings up experiment number 2, different types of shapes. We came up with the idea of doing a knotted version. We did a braided version. We also used the dough cutter to just cut little cube shapes and long strips. We did a pretzel shape as well. The reason we considered this an experiment is because we didn't know if the breadsticks would cook up the same since they were a different shape. After we shaped the dough, we treated it just like the other breadsticks and brushed them with butter, garlic, and garlic powder. As I was thinking about this, I wondered, could you make a vegan version of it? Because I have some friends who are vegan who I cook for. At home, later that night, I made another batch, and that was just garlic knots. And I used olive oil in lieu of butter, and it turned out fantastic. So that was a success. Now we're getting ready to bake the breadsticks. Now, this is not my oven, so it's a good reminder for me that you always have to be cautious using an oven that you're not familiar with because they cook at different rates. So your oven might cook differently than mine, which means you need to check on what you're baking a few minutes before the recipe calls for it, just to make sure it doesn't get overcooked. Some ovens run hotter than others. Now we have our last experiment. Can you freeze it? We baked so many breadsticks and garlic knots this day. Inevitably, some of them needed to be frozen. So this is a few days later. I froze some of the breadsticks. I put it in the air fryer. And what it did is it gave it the outside a little bit of a crunch and the inside was still very nice and soft. So these were great frozen. They don't taste the same the day after without being heated up. So I think this recipe really calls for them to be heated up. Now here you can see all the different shapes that we tried out as experiments, and they were great. We weren't sure if it would change the texture of the bread after being baked because some of them were thicker than the other stuff we rolled out, but just want to report back to you, it was a success. After all our hard work that day, we got to enjoy our breadsticks with marinara sauce, and it was a great treat. The kids were so helpful. They loved this recipe, and it's something that's good to keep in your back pocket. It feeds a crowd. It's really simple. It's very successful. It's delicious, and I hope you enjoy it.